Welcome to Music City Memoirs. I'm your host, Dave Bechtel. Thanks for joining me as we explore the lives of the good people of Nashville that helped give this amazing city the nickname Music City, USA. Today I'm joined by Steve Maxwell. Steve is the new owner of Forks Drum Closet, which is the iconic drum shop that was located over in the 12th South area, which has moved to its new location, and we'll talk to Steve a little bit about that. Forks Drum Closet, as I mentioned, was and has been an iconic shop where everyone that is in the music industry here and people outside the music industry that just do it for fun, that's been their go-to place, not only here in Nashville, but for the region. It's well known throughout the entire United States and, dare I say, internationally for their selection and their service. And when I first heard about Forks Drum Shop potentially closing, that was the first rumor that I heard, definitely put a little panic in me. So then I was very excited to hear that it was just going to be changing ownership.
Right.
And so I was very excited about that. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your background, Steve, and then maybe kind of talk a little bit about what led you to purchasing Forks and all that kind of stuff. So
Sure.
I know a little bit about you, and you are already and have been in the drum business for a long time because you own shops both in Chicago and in New York City.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about those, please?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been a player since I was 12 years old, so that was part of my upbringing. It was just part of my life, and it always has been. And I kind of took a hiatus from that and spent 32 years in what I'll call traditional business. And when I hit about 55, I said I want to go back to what I love best. So that was when we started to open up the shops. We had opened up a shop in Chicago, which is a small, highly focused on more vintage and custom. And then after a while, we opened up the shop in New York City as well. And again, mostly focused on vintage and custom, with the sense that what's really important to us is that the independent drum shop model has to exist. It has to continue to exist. Too many things these days, many things these days are done through big box shops or online only retailers, and all of those are fine and they all have their place, but nothing quite replaces that ability to go in, touch and feel something, interact with someone over the counter, build a relationship with that person, an ongoing relationship, and that's meaningful, and it also creates a sense of community in the city. So we've always felt very strongly about that in Chicago, also in New York, and to be here in Nashville, the whole concept behind that, I've been to this town, I love this town. It's my favorite town in the entire United States. And when Gary had made the decision to sell the land that his business is on, he decided it might be time to retire. I've known Gary for many years and Melissa, and Gary basically called and said, look, would you be interested in buying the business? And he and I think alike in terms of how we feel about customers, how they should be served, what the independent drum shop model is and what it means. And I'll be the first one to say Gary's work for 36 years building that shop is incredible. I mean, it is literally the #1 drum shop in the United States without argument, no question about it. So to have that close would be a terrible thing to happen. You just can't let that happen. So we were very, very thrilled to be able to take that on and do it. And we worked that out. It worked out very well. And the building, which is basically right across the street here, is a perfect spot for the new location to be in. It's got all modern amenities, but it still retains the feel, the touch and feel of the original shop. It was important for us to have everyone in town feel that when they walk through the door of the new shop, it still feels like home. So we took the old display cases from the old shop and put them there. We took the old drum seats that everyone could sit around when they were talking to the guys, and those are there. And then everything else is new and different because it's a bigger operation, a bigger building, but everybody feels at home and comfortable there, which was very important to us.
Yeah, and I'm not a merchandiser by trade, but I have had the opportunity to go inside the new shop. And one of the things that impressed me is, number one, the amount of inventory that's there, but number two, how you don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of inventory that is there. There are some shops, where it's just, kind of overkill with what they have available, but you all have laid it out in such a way that you can test things out, you can listen to it, and you don't feel like you're squeezing in between aisles and rows of things. There's a lot of space in there while giving lots of options, and so kudos to you guys for that. I thought that was laid out quite well.
We thought about it a lot, and Gary's entire team, they're great, and they all came to work with us. They were very, very good at this, and we made a point of wanting it to be very comfortable to the people who were familiar with the old shop. So we took the old display cabinets, and they've been there forever. We took those, the front display counter, the guys are standing right there behind the counter just like they were before. The drum stools are set up where people would come in and sit down, so you walk in that door and it still feels like home. By the same token, then, we wanted the new store, because it's large, big, open, we wanted there to be a wow factor. You want people to walk in and you look at that right-hand wall, 30 feet high, and it's loaded with drum sets. And over here's your snare drum wall. And here's your accessories, and here's some electronic percussion, and here's everything else. And you go up that mezzanine, and that mezzanine is huge and filled with cymbals. There are 3,000 cymbals up there.
Wow.
So what we wanted to do was to make it still feel homey, have a wow factor, not overwhelm people, and just make it comfortable to work through. And everyone did a great job. They did a tremendous job with that. Now that we're in, now we'll work a little bit on tweaking it a little. We want to bring more vintage down here. That's what we do. That's our thing in New York and Chicago. We want to bring some of that down here, so we want to have a vintage corner. But those are things that we'll tweak as we go now that we've made the move.
Yeah. Can we talk about your vintage stuff in Chicago, New York? Because that's sort of what you have been known for many years, and how that differentiates those two shops from the shop here in Nashville. And now you're talking about kind of marrying, some of those ideas and borrowing from each other.
Yes.
Can you talk about your shops in Chicago and New York?
Sure. Yeah, the Chicago shop is in the suburbs, and that one, I think of it more as like an operations center and a little bit of retail. We have a full analog recording studio there that we use, and we do sound files there, photos, videos, website listings. We have a small manufacturing operation in the back where we do relathing and rehammering of old cymbals. We've got a showroom there, and we've got retail operation, but it's a little bit different. New York City is obviously a retail operation in Midtown Manhattan, but our focus in both of those shops has been vintage. That's been my expertise for decades, and high-end custom. So we would do a lot of vintage, we would do a lot of high-end custom, and certain select U.S. brands, not a lot of U.S. brands, certain ones, and we would go very deep within those brands. And that's kind of been our model. Here, Gary has a different model. Gary's model here is 95% of the business is people walking in the door every day, buying many, many of the staples that you need on a daily basis. So what we have done, and where this also dovetails and makes perfect sense, is the learnings that we take from what Gary did for 36 years, we can take some of that and apply it to what we do in our other markets so that we can expand our base a little bit. By the same token, our expertise in vintage and high-end custom is the kind of thing that we want to then bring down and add to what we have here. Gary hasn't had a lot of vintage. That's what I've done and specialized in for 40 years. So we can bring that here. There's demand for it. So it works nice. It dovetails nicely. We get learnings from what Gary developed over the years, and then we hope we can take some of ours and bring it here.
That's really cool. Very neat. Gary had picked out the new location. Is that correct?
It's a funny story. Gary and I started to talk about this in the middle of May. And he said, I've sold the land and I'm ready to retire. Would you want to buy the business? No problem. I said, where are we going to go? Because Gary had to leave within 120 days because he sold the land.
Wow.
So I said, we got to find a place, execute a lease, rebuild. And he said, let's take a ride. He said, there was a place I was looking at. And he said, if I had decided to stay in the business, this is the place that I would have picked. So we drove over here and I looked at it and I said, it's a no-brainer. It's perfect for what we want to do.
Yeah.
So it worked out very well. Actually, Gary bought that building. We leased it from Gary, and that was perfect.
What were some of the things that both for you and Gary that it just seemed to kind of click, make sense? Was it traffic? Was it the location, distance from Music Row? What were the things that made that attractive to you?
You know, it was a combination of things. The space was large enough. Interestingly enough, this space is not as large as the old shop, but because of the way it's laid out with 30-foot ceilings and the like, it actually is significantly more square footage than you would think, and it's also better laid out so it looks larger, and it actually works better for us. But one of the things here was that it was proximity to the old location, so it wasn't far from the old location, wasn't far from downtown, was very convenient to get to, and not the same degree of traffic, the joke being you could walk down 12th South faster than you could drive down there.
Sure.
So all of that being said, and this area is a great area that is definitely up and coming, as we know from all the work that's being done around here. There's great stuff going on here. So all of those things just kind of fell into place. It was the right area. All of the elements just kind of came together at the right time, and it was just perfect. 14 parking spaces.
Yeah,
which
that's
you can't
a bonus.
complain about. That's great.
You probably don't have that in New York City, do you?
No, no. We have our space in New York City. We've been in New York City almost 11 years now, and after 10 years, we moved to a new space, and the space there is a ground floor space on West 30th. So it's downtown between 7th and 8th Avenue, and it's great. But yeah, it's not. There is no parking. You just wing it.
Yeah, I'm curious, you know, because here in Nashville, even though we deal with a lot of traffic on 65 and that sort of thing, it's pretty easy for folks to jump in their truck, zip on over, grab a new kick drum or whatever, throw it in the back, and then zip on home.
Sure.
In New York City, and probably in Chicago at some level, maybe not quite as much, that's a little bit more difficult, you know, to carry a drum set back to your apartment.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, Chicago's not so bad because where we are in Chicago is actually in a suburban area, and that business model is a little different. We do a little bit more. We've got a complete recording studio in there, which we do analog because we love analog, and we've also got an operation there for cymbal relathing and the like. So that's a little bit different. It's more of an operations center. But New York City, the way we've gotten around it is people can pull up front. We can load into their car. We can also, if somebody says, hey, can you ship it to me? Obviously,
because I don't have a car.
You don't have a car.
Yeah.
We can also deliver it to them if they need that. And we're a block away from Penn Station.
Oh, okay,
so
wow.
literally you get off the train and walk one block over, you're where we are. But those people aren't going to be hauling a drum set back on the train. So we'll ship it to them. And if it's someone locally in town, the other day we had a guy come in, bought a whole set, hardware, cymbals, the whole 9 yards, but he needed it that day, and we just delivered it over to him. We cabbed it over to him or Uber it over to him.
Yeah. That's
so
cool.
It works out.
Yeah.
It works out. Most guys coming in, if they're buying a snare drum, they're buying cymbals, they've got their snare bag, their cymbal bag, they can take that with them. The drum set's a different story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the 24-inch kick drums don't go through the subway stations
Yeah,
very
it's
well,
not going
do
through
they?
the subway. Yeah.
That's great. How often do you you reside up in Chicago?
I do.
And then in the last few months, you've been coming down here as
Yes.
you've been closing the deal here and getting the shop ready.
Yep.
How often do you get to your shop in New York?
You know, what I've tried to do, we've got a good team in the shop in New York. What I try to do is get out there maybe every 6 weeks. I haven't done such a good job lately because since June, I've been coming down here almost every week. But I try to break it up. I'm in Chicago for a bit, try to get out to New York for a week every 6 weeks. We also have own the Krabby manufacturing business in Watsonville, California, outside Santa Cruz. So I get out there, again, try to get out there once every couple of months for that operation. And I plan on being down here in Nashville 2 weeks out of 4, 2 weeks out of every month.
Can I circle back to the Krabby drums real quick?
Sure.
Because I would say that there's probably a lot of folks that will listen and watch this that know about them, but then there's probably a large segment that don't know about those. In the world in which I live in, those are kind of seen as maybe like the Rolls Royce of drums. Is that okay to say?
Yeah, it's okay to say, and I'm okay talking about it in those words because I didn't create it.
Okay.
Johnny created it. Johnny Krabby created it, and he created the Rolls Royce, Lamborghini, Ferrari of drums. Pick your choice, and it is truly remarkable. The work that he did in turning solid boards, and many people don't realize most drums, they're made from plywood. they're fine. They're made extremely well. But there's 6 or 8 thin plies of wood that are bent together, and it makes a nice strong shell. But there's glue between those plies. Johnny developed the process for steam bending one single board for snare drums. And he's not the first person that did this. Slingerland and Ludwig and Leedy did it back years and years and years ago. But he's taken it a step further and does it now for entire drum sets, and started doing that around 2006. And what he's done is masterful, and it has never been replicated by anyone else. People have tried, and it was just masterful. So what you end up creating there is that instrument, because it's a solid shell, there's very little glue. There's glue where the scarf joint comes together, and there's reinforcement rings to keep the shell in round. But by having that solid shell construction, the drum is far more resonant, much more resonant. The tuning range is much, much wider, and the sound is so pure. So studios love it, and players love it. And then the drums speak beautifully. So they are truly remarkable instruments, really incredible stuff. And Johnny passed away a little over 2 years ago. For about 8 years before that, I was a partner with him along with one other person. And when he passed away, we had to make the hard decision of what do you do now? And we decided it was that his legacy needed to live on, and we needed to keep it going. And that's what we've done. The team out there, they build the drums. They were building the drums while Johnny was alive. And to Johnny's credit, when you look back on this, over the course of since 2004, that business, since 2004, he went into business on his own, started building kits in 2006. Over the course of that time, there have been over 800 solid shell drum sets built and over 5,000 snare drums. And the demand doesn't get any less. People still love them and want them today. And that's a great testimonial to him.
Yeah, and maybe for the folks that don't know a whole lot about drums, when you throw out those numbers of 800 drum sets and 5,000 snare drums, it's like, yeah, I mean, 5,000 snare drums over the last decade. Yeah. But the process of what it takes to make one of those is pretty significant, is it not?
It really is. And it's not like, I'll give you an example. One of my good friends worked for one of the major drum companies, and I asked him one day, I said, if you brought an order down to the factory floor and said, make this drum set, how long would it take them to make that plywood drum set? He said, a day. I said, okay, here's what happens with us. You have to buy the wood, and it means the wood has to be available. You have to go and grade the boards, because the boards are going to be solid. They're not going to be cut for veneers or plies. They've got to be solid, so there can't be knots. The boards have to be perfect. You have to have that wood shipped out. You have to have that wood re-sawn, and you have to soak the wood. Some species can be soaked in a few days. Some take a few months. When you take them out, then you have to steam them to get them ready to be bent. And in that bending process, when you take them out of the steamer, so, well, what's the big deal? Well, you take it out of the steamer, and you have under 2 minutes to bend that board into the mold, or the board will crack.
Wow.
So there's a very, very complex procedure, and it's a very lengthy procedure, and it's not as simple as, oh, let's just dial up and get some more curly maple and bird's eye maple. No, it doesn't work that way. It's not very available. So yeah, regular maple, you can get that, but species like that, bird's eye is very rare. So the window of time that it takes to build that kit is very long. You're looking at probably from start to finish, it's probably going to be 6-7 months, and we'd like to trim that down, but you can't trim down, you can't sacrifice quality just to make quantity and get it out the door. So,
would you say that most folks that would order up a kit or a snare drum, they go into that process knowing that?
Yes, they do. There's John Monteleone is a very fine acoustic guitar maker in New York, and I'll liken it to him. When John has stopped taking orders because he has so many in the queue, and he will say, it's a third down now, it's a third down when I'm halfway done, and a third when I'm ready when it's finished. And his timeline is probably 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
Now we're not in that.
Yeah.
We're not doing that, but people understand. They know, and some people have come to us and said, I would like the kit to be curly maple. And I said, it's probably going to take over a year, because you just can't go get curly maple.
Sure.
And with certain things, if you're a person who brings in wood, and you've got a a board, and that board is the very, very dense bird's eye maple or beautiful curly maple, you can get more money for that board from someone who's going to actually use it for veneers.
Oh yeah,
And strip it for veneers.
Sure.
They get more mileage out of it. So they'll pay, if for us to buy that one board, they don't want to sell it to us. They want to sell it to someone who's going to get more scale out of it. So it becomes one of those things where it's very, very tricky. And you have to, there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. Have you run into issues where species are no longer available?
Yes.
I know like Gibson Guitars here
Yes.
has run into that.
Yes. There are things these days like Babinga and Rosewood, which are on the CITES, CITES list for endangered species that can no longer, they can be exported, but the documentation and the processing behind it is incredible to do. We had actually gotten some Babinga and to build a couple of snare drums with, and a customer of ours in Japan wanted those snare drums, and it would have been literally 40 pages of documentation to get him those 2 snare drums. I finally said, we just can't do this. And I totally support the fact that they are making sure that these species exist. Totally support that. And what we've done is we've just said, look, if we get some of this wood and we can build the drums, we will, but we're not going to take an order for it because we just can't guarantee that we could ever get it.
Yeah. So you're quite the historian when it comes to drums, and specifically, you know, vintage drums. What spawned that? You know, because, you know, I know you said you started playing when you were 12.
Right.
But, you know, you went a little deeper than just, you know, being the kid, you know, bashing the cymbals and that sort of thing in the garage band. What kind of gave you that passion to understand more about the drums themselves?
You know, it's an interesting thing. From the beginning when I started playing, I was mostly a jazz drummer and a jazz fan, but from the very, very beginning, I had this passion for vintage drums. I just loved the idea of it. And if you go back to when I was young, I mean, we're talking in the 60s, there was no internet, there were no cell phones, there were no ways to get information other than from people who had worked with these instruments. And so for me, seeking out that knowledge and information, there was a fellow in Newington, Connecticut that was a wealth of information, and at the time he was probably the age I am now, but he knew everything. And I wasn't far from there. I lived in Rhode Island. I would drive down to see him and learn everything I could from him and absorb everything I could, get old catalogs. And it just was something that I had a passion for. I loved vintage instruments and still do. So it always kind of stuck with me. And I just wanted to, when I played on the road and I gigged on the road, I always had vintage snare drums. Even if my kit was a standard kit, I had vintage snare drums. Those instruments spoke to me in some way. You know, they're all a little different, and the wood has aged, so there's a certain mellowness to the sound that isn't there maybe in a new version. Just like with an acoustic instrument, the same thing. Over the years, they mellow, the sound changes. So I've always had a passion for it, and just really immersed myself in the details of it.
Yeah. You said you grew up being a bit of a jazz drummer. Maybe we can geek here for just a quick second. Who were some of your big musical influences?
My influences were Buddy Rich, Louie Bellson, Papa Joe Jones, who played in the Basie Band for years and was just a magnificent influence. Polar opposites. Buddy Rich for the technical expertise,
Yeah.
which blew me away, and Louie Bellson. Papa Joe for the subtlety and the beauty of what he did when he played and the musicality of everything that he did. Those were kind of my the people that I most admired.
That's super cool. Had the opportunity as a young man to meet Buddy Rich, and I would love to share that story. However, that would give us an explicit rating on iTunes. So I will just say that it was really fun meeting one of my heroes, and we'll just leave it at that.
There you go. I only met Buddy once as he was going into a hotel. I was going to see him. I was young, and I stopped. So, you're Buddy Rich. Can you sign this for me? And he signed something for me and just walked off. But there are other stories. There's another whole side of Buddy, and Buddy was actually a very kind and caring person,
Sure.
and people don't hear enough about that.
Yeah.
But Buddy was a masterful technician, as was Louie Bellson. Those guys were incredible, and I was fortunate to see them many times. And fortunate to study with Papa Joe Jones in New York
Wow.
in the early 70s as well. So I was very fortunate.
That's cool. I just did a session this last week, and the drummer had a double bass pedal, and I brought up Louis Bellson, and unfortunately the drummer didn't know who that was, which to me I was like, oh my goodness, how could you not know who Louis Bellson is? And explaining to him that he was the first guy to have the two bass drums, and now kind of in the 80s or maybe the 70s, the hard rock guys kind of they thought that they were the originators of that, and I was like, no, that went way back before then. But I actually did have as well an opportunity to meet Louis on a couple of different occasions, and he was probably one of the most kindest musician types that I've ever come in contact with, and he was a pretty big influence in my life, not only from a music standpoint, but how you talk and treat people, because he was kind of a big deal for a long time, and he didn't have any reason to stop and chat with a 10-year-old kid, and he certainly took the time.
He was very, very, very wonderful man. I met him a couple of times. Wonderful man. And part of what I did and still do, but in the past with my vintage side of it, is I've had the honor to place kits that were owned by these people. I owned Buddy's last Slingerland touring kit. I owned a kit that was Louis Bellson's that was specially made for him by Rogers with 24-karat gold-plated hardware. Unbelievable things. I owned a kit that belonged to, I helped Joe Morello sell the kit that he used in the Brubeck days.
Oh, my word.
So a lot of those things, and there are many, many more examples of that, there are things that we specialized in. There were people that I loved and admired, and we also helped to preserve parts of their legacy by taking those and moving them to people who have collections who appreciate them so that they'll be there for others to see. So it's important stuff.
That is really neat. You mentioned the big box retailers.
Yeah.
And they do serve a purpose. Mm-hmm. And, when I'm working on a home project, there are times where I need to go get a tool or a part, and there's a big box retailer right down the street. And so that's very convenient for me to go and grab a light bulb or a new wrench or something like that, because the old one isn't working. Yeah. And so I'm grateful for that. But then there are times where it's really frustrating to me when I'm trying to work on maybe a piece of plumbing that isn't maybe a standard thing, and I need a question answered, and I go to the big box hardware store and I ask the gentleman or the lady that's working in that department, hey, this is the issue that I'm running into. What do you recommend? And then they start looking at the back of the packages and then reading what's on the back of the package to me to tell me, well, this is what this is, and this is probably what you should have for your issue. They're not speaking out of knowledge. Right. And so that's, and I don't think I'm alone with that I'm willing to spend a little bit more to go to a place that, I can get an actual answer from someone that's knowledgeable. Can you maybe talk about, because it seems like that's a pretty important aspect of your business models in all three of your shops.
Yes.
So can you speak to, why is that important to you?
Well, it's for the very same reasons that you said. As a musician, if you're stuck on the road, I need to get a few more pairs of 5B sticks or whatever it is. Whatever's convenient to go to, it's a GC, a Sam Ash, or whatever it is, and you get what you need, and that's fine, and that's terrific. And there's always going to be that, and there's a need for that, and that's good. But there are people who come in and go, they need to go somewhere and say, this happens in New York all the time. People would come in and go, I got to get rid of this snare drum, it's no good. I said, bring it in, let me see it. And I play with it and go, try it now. He'd say, it's fine. Yeah. What did you do? I said, well, you had it tuned this way. I tuned it this way. You like it better. So now you don't have to get rid of it. So that kind of a service is the kind of thing that you can only get from people who have the knowledge and the expertise and experience. In a large, massive, big box anything, there may be a couple of people there who understand, but most of the staff are not as experienced. They don't have decades worth of experience in that angle. and they don't have repair services. We do repair services in all of those locations. We can take things in, tweak them. We can give people advice. They'll come in and say, look, I'm looking for a drum set. The first thing I ask people is, what kind of music do you play? Mm-hmm. That's important. Not, well, here's what I have on the shelf, and I want to, I'm getting pressure to clear the stock on these, so let me see if I can sell this guy that drum set. To me, that's not how we would ever do it, and I never did in my prior business life. It was always, what does that customer need? Find that out first and see if I have something that fits. And if I don't mind sending them to someone else. We have a nice relationship in New York with the folks at GC and Sam Ash. We carry the types of things that they don't carry. They have guys in there looking for Zildjian K Constantinople ride cymbals. And they'll say, look, I got one, but go down to Steve, he's got probably 15. And we get somebody coming in New York looking for X, and we really don't sell that. We said, go down the street, go talk to GC, or go talk to the guys at Ash. That can work. It can coexist. There's room.
Do you have, as a retailer, difficulty maybe training your customer base to saying, hey, we might not be the cheapest, fastest, whatever, but there's a reason for that. Let me show you why it matters, why we are here. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of an ongoing thing for you guys?
Some of it, when you start talking about basics, the staples of your, heads, sticks, things you need on a regular basis, we will always be price competitive for things like that. People who are customers generally are, they generally value the service we offer. So it isn't like we have to convince them that they should value what we're doing, and maybe it's a little bit more expensive as a result of that because we have more staff and the like. Most people are very good about that. Yeah, once in a while you'll have situations, somebody will come in, they'll talk to you for, half an hour about things, and then they'll buy it online somewhere. Yeah. But that's always going to happen. Sure. That's life.
Yeah.
But that's not normally what we see.
Are there some drummers that you've been able to work with and outfit that you thought, oh, wow, that was really cool that I got to work with this particular drummer? And it may be because they are a high-profile player, or it might be just because of their situation. Do you have some stories that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it actually is interesting. We did, I mentioned Joe Morello before, and Joe was living in New Jersey, and he had a very, very good friend of mine from Nashville here, Danny Gottlieb, great drummer, phenomenal player. He knew Joe, he studied with Joe, and Joe had gotten to a point where he wanted to sell some of his stuff, and Danny recommended me, so I helped Joe sell some of those things, and then I also realized that, Joe's financial situation wasn't particularly good. And I asked him, I said, whatever happened to your Brubeck era kit? And he said, well, when the band broke up in '67, Dave put it in storage. He said, I don't know where it is. Nobody can find it. I said, why don't you call him? Call Dave, see if you can find the kit. They eventually got the kit back, and thankfully it hadn't been damaged. Needed a little bit of restoration, parts here and there, but I was able to sell that for Joe. And that was significant. That was significant for help for them, and that was important to me. And so that was a good story, being able to help someone. And I admired Joe tremendously because he was such a phenomenal player. Joe was a tasteful player, but Joe had technical expertise beyond belief. I told him once, I saw him at the Newport Jazz Festival, and they used to have a thing called the Drum Workshop. Not DW, our good friends, but Drum Workshop from noon to 5 on Saturdays. And everybody would come out and do 15 minutes. Buddy Rich, Louis Belson, Art Blakey, Elvin Jones, Max Roach, Tony Williams, Don Lamont, Papa Joe, on and on and on and on. And Joe comes out, and Joe's playing, and Joe had an interesting sense of humor. He was a funny guy, and he wanted to come out and just kind of demonstrate his chops. So he's playing, and then he puts his right hand down, takes a handkerchief out of his pocket, wipes his forehead as he's doing a closed stroke roll across the entire drum set, the toms and bass drum. And I say, I never forgot that. He said, I don't remember that. I said, yeah, you wouldn't, but I did. I remember because that was significant.
Yeah.
So I was nice to come around full circle and help Joe and his wife Jean at the end. The other thing I did for many years, I managed Charlie Watts' collection
Wow.
over in London. And Charlie is a very, very sweet guy, wonderful guy, and very big fan of drummers that he respected. So Davey Tuff, Sid Catlett. Now we're going way back there. But then also Buddy, Art Blakey, Elvin, those people that he really respected and wanted instruments owned by those people. So I sold Charlie quite a number of instruments like that, and actually used to go over once a year to organize that collection for him.
That's really cool.
But yes, and the quick Charlie story, which is the best Charlie story of all, I'm over there the first time to catalog the collection. And there is literally hundreds of boxes, no order to anything, just stuff in boxes. So I'm setting everything up. I get down to the last thing, and I called him, and I said, whatever happened to the Ludwig kit? He was a Gretsch player forever, still is. Still has the Gretsch kit. But in the early stages, he had a sky blue Ludwig kit. So whatever happened to that? So I gave it to somebody, and they rewrapped it or something. It's gone. It's been gone for a long time. I said, okay. I'm crawling around on the floor, literally in their warehouse, crawling on the floor, and I find 3 boxes, and scribbled on one of the boxes says, my first drum set. I said, pull the box out, open it up. It's the Sky Blue Pearl Ludwig kit. 9 by 13, 16, 16, 14 by 22. I picked up the phone and called him, and I said, the drum set? Yeah. He said, I'm looking at it right here. He said, come over. He comes over. I said, there it is. He said, I thought it was gone. He said, my dad bought that for me on hire credit when I was 19.
Oh, my word.
He said, I said, well, here it is. So that was so cool. And then inside of the Stones have a very, very sophisticated operation there. And the person who was taking care of all of that said, what are you guys doing? I said, well, we found this kit. She went back up into the office, and about 10 minutes later came back with at least 40 to 50 photo images of the Stones in that very early 60s period with Charlie with that kit.
Holy cow.
And that kit, I believe, was used as one of the display items in the exhibition that's been going around.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the story behind that kit. He thought it was gone.
That is really, I'm sure that was probably very meaningful to him.
Oh, it was huge. He was like, because his father had bought it for him. We didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So he thought it was gone. So that was fun. That was great fun.
That's really cool. I think we got to leave it at that.
Sure.
I don't know that we can top that story. Steve, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We appreciate it. Hope that Forks continues to just be a place where drummers here can go to.
Yes.
And they know that they're going to get the best service, best selection of everything. And so thanks for being someone that's kind of retaking the mantle there and moving us forward.
You want to carry that legacy forward. Gary created it for 36 years, and we want it to go on and carry it forward.
Well, welcome to Nashville.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope and wish you much success in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Pleasure to be here.